dici se me la accendi? È acceso? È acceso, sì, è acceso. Allora, visto che... Niente, allora cominciamo subito con...
We are about to begin.
Sì, ecco. Queste sono le classiche cose che abbiamo studiato apposta per guadagnare ancora qualche minuto.
Just a few more minutes and we'll be beginning.
Allora, dopo queste due giornate
After
bellissime.
these two lovely days which we've been spending together,
Happy? Chi vuole venire a sedersi qui può venire, se no può venire quando siamo in democrazia, ognuno è libero di fare come si sente meglio, però se volete accomodarvi siete benvenuti. E allora niente, abbiamo deciso di
we
fare
have decided to do something slightly different from what we usually do. I'm here as usual, and we'll be having
il curatore e l'architetti,
we'll be
diciamo così, le istituzioni
listening to the artists and to the architects, and then the institutions will be speaking at the end, because what we think is important in the project that we want to do together with the association is to build alliances amongst people. And he's asking if the translation is coming through. He's asking if the translation is coming through. Could you tell him that the translation is coming through all right? I hope it's coming through. We are translating. Now, if you've been following us in the installations which we did yesterday, I think knows enough about what we are going to talk about this morning. But if somebody's here who wasn't here yesterday, I'm going to try and give you a summary so that we can see if we can understand the sense of this meeting. This meeting, together with Maurizio and Fiaschi, we have started this relationship, this activity. It's an enterprise. It's non-profit, it's non-commercial, together with the Associazione Arte Continua. And the attempt is to create alliances in the territory. And we want to see how we can remain in the mood and in the world. This is the mood and this is the world. So the attempt was to see if how we could start, how artists in the Renaissance had thought of the future, had invented perspective and created the idea of progress. And when we got to a very strong point of crisis, which is not only ecological, but it's a transit between the west to the east. And so we thought that art could somehow or other bring us to a rethinking of this relationship of our existence, a relationship on the other side of nature and of existing in the world and of being and existing in cities, so that we could emerge from an idea of colonization and to an idea of colonialism. The artists, we think, are people who are most suited because that's their problem. They're trying to do something that touches their individuality and touches what instead becomes the sense of interpreting the world and of looking to one's own time, but also to the times of the past and the times to come. So what we want to launch here with this idea of cities of the future, with art and with the project that we've done together with Vicente and Polino, where artists are called upon to think of humanity within a forest, but not as the forest where the place is about to become extinct, but as the new city. When we went to Prato and we met with Binisbaki, president of the Picture Museum, who was presented by Stefano Cargol, who's about to arrive. We met with Assessore Barberis, who'd done the project with the urban jungle, and they'll be talking about it later. And so from these meetings, which we had via web, an installation was born in the square in Piazza, and an installation by Anthony Gormley. Anthony will be connected with us in just a few seconds. And it was a sculpture which was in the center of the city of Prato, which generally is not considered a historical city, but instead it is. It has a great history, a very significant history from the artistic point of view. It's a sculpture which looked outside, looks to the future, looked towards the new areas, which are the factories and the houses, the social housing, and things which have been built in the times of democracy. I think this is a fundamental point. It is, I come from the world of politics, so the question of freedom is the fundamental thing that the artist brings, and individual liberty is the best thing that the West has thought about. And so democracy is something which is to be defended, which is to be upheld, and art certainly with no freedom, with no liberty, has no way of existing. So the artist for us represents and is liberty. And it is around this alliance that we are trying to do a reforesting of the urban areas, the homes of artists, the interventions of artists within factories where one works, and also to redo the whole outside of the factories. We can't leave industrial areas as if they were the ugliest places on the planet, where most people live most of their time. I hope that I've given you a bit of food for thought. I hope that everybody will be developing as best he thinks, and that is why I asked the public administrators to speak at the end rather than at the beginning. So now the floor is to Anthony Gormley, who will be connected via web, and then I forget who the others are, but we'll be listening to them with pleasure.
Ciao Anthony, siamo a Poggibonsi, la tua seconda città.
Hello.
Hi, Anthony. We're in Poggibonsi, your second city. We are at the Castle. Can you hear the English translation? Hello? Can you hear the English translation? This is the English translation. Can you hear the English translation? Can you hear the English translation? Can you hear the English translation? Hello, this is the English translation. Can you hear the English translation?
Anthony, ci senti?
Yeah.
Can you hear the English translation? 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 Hello, this is the English translation. This is the English translation. Can you hear the English translation? Can you hear the English translation? This is the English translation. Hello, this is the English translation. This is the English translation. Can you hear the English translation? This is the English translation. Hello, this is the English translation. This is the English translation. Can you hear the English translation? Can you hear the English translation? This is the English translation. English translation channel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. English translation. This is the English translation. Hello, this is the English translation. This is the English translation. This is the English translation.
Want to begin?
Yes. Come.
Okay. So, buongiorno tutti. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this wonderful, reconvening of a question of how art can continue the life of citizens of cities, of, I guess, a collective future. And I wanted to start with looking at this work, which was so important to me as a student. This is the Lightning Field by Walter de Maria, made in 1977, which I visited when I just finished as a student in 1979. I think of this as exemplary work. It's a kind of acupuncture of landscape that makes us aware of time and place and invites us to enter the arena of the work. It's 7,200 feet above mean sea level. It is describing by a 1 mile by 1 kilometer plane an absolutely horizontal surface held by these needles, these sharp points of the needles that are, these poles are 220 feet apart. And you were invited to enter the field of the work. You are told on arrival that you should expect and be prepared for a remote experience. This is a very extraordinary re-engagement with landscape, with the elements, with the season of the year, the nature of the weather. Anyway, I guess my inspiration has been to try to find a non-exclusive equivalent for that environment that we as human animals have chosen to make our home, the city, the town, the village. And I guess with the project that I made in Poggibonsi, where you're all sitting now, Fai Spazio Prende Posto, I wanted to see whether I could do an acupuncture of the city that is non-exclusive, that is truly democratic, and that will, in an equal way to this great work of Walter de Maria, involve you in a field, but in this case, a field of social connections that are contextualized by the city. So, got to go to the next slide, but I'm not quite sure how. So here is a work that is just outside the Centro Commerciale Valdelsa. It is a three-dimensional mapping of the space of Silvio Ciappi, a mapped moment of human life taken out of time, a kind of industrial fossil placed into the flow of daily life. So how was this made? It's made from similar kind of orthogonal grid to Walter de Maria's, but now the grid of the city. 4 blocks of each 8 times larger than the one before, made as an evocation of the interior condition of the body without reference to any kind of appearance or anatomy. I guess I ought to talk about the process. We molded Silvio Ciappi. We covered him in cling film. We then covered him in plaster and Hessian, and then used that mold, half of which you can see here, to make this evocation of the space that he took up. Here is another work, Cecchi, on a path by the elementary school by the Taggia, which is passed every day by parents and children going to and from the school. How did we make these works? Here is the process that I just described. I made it in two halves. One half was the body, second was the arms and the head, which were later joined together. This was a moment of lived human life that has been abstracted from life. And we just asked everyone to stand naturally, stand still, no dramatic gestures, no implication of movement, just a moment of human being taken out of time. Here is Filippo Fontanelli. He's at the station on the railway line between Siena and Florence. He's passed every day by passengers to and from work. Here is a still moment in a more widely connected world. I need to describe how I chose both the participants and the places that they were finally located in. In the Teatro Verdi, in the middle of Poggibonsi, we set up a studio. This is where people were molded, but also where we invited cittadini Poggibonsi to come in and to share their personal histories and their relationship with the town. We asked them, what places in the town are particularly resonant for you, either in emotional terms or just in practical terms? And many people came in and gave us accounts. You can see to the right of the map are kind of interview responses, people identifying places that made sense to them, where they had their first kiss, where they were born. And from that, we then made this map. It was a kind of psychogeographic map, a kind of affective map of the city that was very different from the grid. We then used this map to decide where pieces went. It was a very important balancing between the process of finding the volunteers and then the process of finding where the sculptures that resulted from the molding and casting of those volunteers' sculptures were going to go. I think it's important to say that you know, the way finally that we got our 7 participants was in the Fiesta dell'Unità. Well, it was amazing. All of the staff and volunteers that were working for Arte all'Arte talked to a lot of people when they were when the town had come together in this moment of celebration and explained to them that this was a possibility of participating in a work of contemporary art. And from that, we just put all of the names in a hat, and Achille Oliva drew out 7 participants. So it was a random democratic system of choice, which then ended up with very specific sites for each of the work. And these works now remain in the town night and day, summer and winter, rain and shine. A kind of, I believe, acupuncture of the social space, that in some way act as reflexive instruments. What is this thing doing here? What am I doing here? What kind of future do we think we are making together? I wanted to end with just one or two other projects that I've made using a similar idea. So this is in the heart of the financial area of London, Leadenhall Street, next to the Leadenhall building that in some way interrogates. These are both leaning at about 78 degrees, one leaning forward, the other leaning back. They're kind of two sarcophagi. This was made much earlier than Fai Spazio Prende Posto. But it has the same idea of interrogating and interrupting the life on the street. And here is another work made later, Event Horizon, as you can see from the sign to the right of the sculpture on the confluence of Fifth Avenue and Broadway, just south of Madison Square Park. 4 works on the street and 27 on the skyline, doing a similar work of acupuncture in collective space in order to contrast with the heroism or idealized sexuality of most 18th, 19th century statues in the city, works that stand on the same ground as the viewers, as life itself, or at the intersection of infinite space, cosmic space, the space of the sky, and the built world. You can see there's one on the roof above the sculpture that this passerby is looking at, wondering, what the hell is this thing doing in my world? Anyway, I just wanted to end with a inversion of this principle. This is a work called Horizon Field Hamburg that was shown 10 years ago in the Deichtorhallen in Hamburg. It's a platform 50 meters long by 25 meters wide that is 7.5 meters from the ground. You are invited as a visitor to the museum to give your mobile phone and your shoes to the people looking after this exhibition and installation. And then you walk up a staircase and onto this platform. The platform is suspended by only eight cables that are only 18 millimeters wide. The platform is a kind of active physical demonstration of the democratic principle. The whole platform moves. It's a membrane that moves in relation to the actions and movement of every citizen on it. It can swing up to 1.85 meters in any direction. And if one or more people move in one direction and stop, an oscillation starts. And the minute the thing begins to move, as in this, you can see the people begin to sit down because you can no longer stand if it's oscillating at its full point. Anyway, what's the point of this? I think this, the museum offered me a retrospective. I said, no, I would like to use this space that in some way is a reflexive museum space to reconnect the people to their environment. And you see the couple on the right-hand side of this image are looking out. I had the obscured windows removed at the same level, eye level, as a standing person on the membrane. And you see this couple, the boyfriend is pointing out to the girlfriend where they have come from. So this became then a place that was in the city, but not of it, from which you could look out at the world at large. 100 people at a time were able to dwell on this highly reflective. It was like a black mirror made from 7 tons of polyurethane paint that reflected the environment and also every citizen that stood upon it. This was a way in which, for the collective body, art was able to regenerate a sense of an open agora that was like a kind of flying carpet, that through not just the reflective internal contemplation of the viewers, but their interaction physically brought a new constitution of the collective body of the city. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you for the extraordinary opportunity of being part of Arte all'Arte. For me, one of the most wonderful and most inspiring projects initiated in Europe for the reintegration of art and life. Thank you.
Grazie, Anthony.
Thank you, Anthony. We are absolutely honored of your participation to the life of Poggibonsi and of our activity. Very grateful. Thank you. And now we are going to give the floor to Emanuele Coccia, who is an Italian philosopher teaching at the Sorbonne in Paris, but also at the MIT in Boston. We had several meetings with him lately, and we were very happy to have his participation. And also we are very interested, in his books that I would like to invite you to read: Metamorphoses, The Life of Trees, and so on and so forth. But what's most important is what he's going to tell us now. So good morning. Can you hear me well? So thank you. Thank you, Mario, for your kind invitation. I'm very happy and honored to actually have a conversation with you, and I'm very sorry I cannot be with you in person. Also, I am traveling. I will be traveling soon. I cannot stay with you the whole time, but I wanted to listen at least to a part of the presentations and perhaps say a few words to share my enthusiasm, but also the relevance in my mind of this initiative. This is a very important program for several reasons, not only because it invites everyone to transform a local reality, to rethink a location, with the 20th century town planning and urban policies for the 21st century. But it is actually the idea of art itself that is deeply transformed. In the last few years, there has been a great misunderstanding around and about art. There's a great ghost haunting, Europe, which is political art. And the misunderstanding is due to the fact that people think that art becomes political only when it takes care of the faits divers, so the different events happening that we can read even on your cell phone. So in this situation, the art becomes a sort of a subgroup of newspapers where artists have to describe not only what everyone knows about, but also have to rethink about all this information that we are receiving many times a day. And also art is cut down to a simple, visual transformation of this information that we would be getting. But this program reminds us that the art can become political, not just because it speaks about migration, feminism, ecology, whatever, which are essential themes that really affect my work and my frame of mind and my work as a philosopher, but also art is political, not only because it speaks about politics, but because it builds polis. It is the flesh and bone of polis. It is the flesh and bone of the place we are inhabiting. And I'm speaking from Paris, and I wonder, how come people believe that Paris is so interesting, so that billions of people on a daily basis don't, keep coming to Paris? Because in the city center of Paris, the difference between work of art and city is hard to see. So living in Paris, but after all, you are in Italy, I would say that in any city, historical city center, you have the same experience. Well, in Paris, it is like living inside the Louvre, with an apartment. And, and I'm so lucky that I live in the Parisian city center, really next to the Seine River, and I can cross the river, and all those buildings around me look like they have been painted. And I think that it's much rewarding than many sessions you can do with your psychoanalyst, because you can enjoy the beauty. So it is better to spend more, to live in a beautiful place, and maybe not need any kind of help for mental health, rather than the other way around. So art can really affect the human space, not because it speaks about specific events. Art is intrinsically and universally political, despite what it talks about, despite what it does, because it is at the basis of our essential relationship with space and the world itself. Although this is a trivial idea, it is important to remind everyone about that, because I think that this art program, it's a good attempt to go into this direction. So art should not be thought about something that you can see in certain spaces, in certain buildings, in certain locations. We need to relinquish the idea of a model of a museum that is dating back to the 19th century. Art is the shape of landscape, in one word. So art is not the form of certain objects within the landscape or the content of some places, but actually it's the form of the locations and of the earth itself. My first point. My second point, which is absolutely in line with this program that makes it so innovative and radical, I think we have to stop thinking that art can be visible only in certain times of the day. We have to stop investing money in, events, fairs, exhibits. We should actually invest the same amount of money, that instead of transforming Venice, the Arsenal's Venice for 2 months, perhaps Venice could be transformed forever, or we could transform Prato, Poggibonsi, any other city in the world. So the Biennale's exhibits should become permanent exhibits and affecting the shape of landscape, really become the shape and form of our city. This is what art has to resume doing. So it has to be like a sort of a milestone, a stone in our city that lasts forever. And then one second item that I would like to share with you, if I still have time, which is the other important element of this art program, which is the democratic opening of art. Art is democratic, or should be democratic. It's not by chance, I believe, that this art program starts from Italy, again, from a typical municipality of medieval Italy or Renaissance Italy, because Italy offers a lot of examples from this point of view. I mean, there are many people living elsewhere, in Germany, in France, in the US, but there is something quite peculiar in the Italian history that makes the Italian urbanistic model as interesting and as innovative. And so in the light of the political fragmentation of the Italian territory, that we can, now think as a single country, but it wasn't many years ago. Well, thanks to this political fragmentation, the fact that every regional area used to be, or every city used to be like a kingdom, I would say. Well, initially we had a lot of art lovers, art, I mean, people that, were buying or promoting art or building art. And so it became a sort of an open museum. It is as if in Paris, you didn't have just one, in France, you didn't have one Paris, but actually 100 Paris. So the lack of political unity in Italy fostered art. And it's another historical issue I would like to share with you that we often forget, which is the presence of the church, the power of the church in terms of art that produced something quite peculiar. And I realized about that immediately after the fire of Notre Dame. You remember a few years ago, Notre Dame caught on fire, and immediately after, many important, and relevant, people offered to pay with their own money the restoration of this building. And the French public opinion reacted in a way that I still have to understand, in a very violent manner. They thought that this desire to pay for the restoration of Notre Dame, which is truly an icon of French culture, as an attempt to evade taxes, and as for tax evasion. And so although these very wealthy people said, well, we are going to pay taxes anyway, because in France, you have a special law that cuts down your tax payment if you actually, make donations for art restoration and art in general. So what happened is that, the whole restoration project of Notre Dame was such that on Le Monde and Libération, there were many articles of left-wing, intellectuals against the restoration of Notre Dame, with quite ridiculous, rationales, I would say. But their hostility bore witness to the fact that in France, the art of, artwork is considered as part of the elite that becomes only, belongs only to the wealthy. Whereas in Italy, it never really happened something like that, for a very simple reason. As I was saying, perhaps the most important client for art was the Catholic Church. And for the last 150 years, they stopped doing it. And unfortunately, this is one of the reasons of the cultural and decadence of art in Italy. But the church in Italy for many centuries had a very interesting and unique attitude, which was to invite the most important artists on an international level without, being concerned about their moral status. For instance, they asked Caravaggio to paint for the church, and he was an assassin, a murderer. And they were asking the more, advanced artists to tell with their own language the, the gospel in their own language, in their own style. So they were actually asking, the church was asking every single artist to work, notwithstanding their beliefs, their, who they were. And actually, they interpreted the gospel sometime in glamour images. Just think about Cima di Conegliano, who painted Christ like Lipster of that time. This ability to actually allow art to be free, sometime even in a profane manner, actually, as the artist would think about that. So it was very interesting experience, because artists could actually change the common narration of that civilization. But unlike what happened in the other countries where art was made by princes, but actually or paid by princes, but it was only for princes and for, aristocratic buildings. The Italian church was actually putting these masterpieces in churches where anyone could go in, even, the homeless. And so, anyone that grew up in Italy knows that in order to go see Caravaggio, you didn't, when I was growing up, you weren't paying any ticket to go see Caravaggio. I remember as a child to go to San Luigi dei Francesi and just go see, the painting by Caravaggio or other painters in other churches. So it was like a sort of a different, like a museum gathering different art pieces in the same space. So, the asking artists to do anything was needed to do in a city, or allowing anyone to see that artwork, notwithstanding their background, their age, their wealth. Well, it is really part of the Italian DNA, and this is something that has to be restored and revived. And it is really the base for rethinking what is art today, what is art going to be in the future, but also how to build the cities where we'll want to live in. Thank you.
Grazie Emanuele, appassionato sostegno a questa azione che stiamo cercando di fare.
What we're trying to do, Lorenzo Fiasco, is 32, together with artists and curators. We're working, we've always tried to look for professionals to imitate and help artists, because we believe in the professionalism of choices. And the Catholic Church at the time, of course, had the competence to entrust the task to people who knew how to choose and who brought to the eyes of others things which are interesting, important to look at, not only in the immediate, but in time. So this for me is connected with what we were saying when I was thanking people who are helping us to go on. We're not as powerful as the church, but
queste persone che sono venute a aiutarci in queste piccole città e che appunto nella
tradizione. And this for a tradition in Italy, small cities had artists always who can be enjoyed and who are present in the public space. And the competition between the church and the Podestà has shown that this art was open to all and could go everywhere. In the city, the model of San Gimignano, shall we say, has maybe if tourism is a bit too violent, and in all places. So we look at all areas, we start from the poorer areas. Mr. Gormley, can you hear the English translation?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Oh, good.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Good. Thanks. Personally, we can consider that he saved a part of the city where he lives from the speculation of builders. And this is something that we're grateful for. And this is part of our life, our administration. Our project was between the city and the countryside. So we met talking together, and we're glad to be able to speak together today. Thank you. Can we show the pictures of the foundation, and I will begin to speak. I was born in a little town of 500 inhabitants. That's where I grew up. Then when I was 17, I went to the university in Valencia. This town is in a valley, It's very similar to Catania. There's lots, it's the height of Panarea. It's in front of Ibiza. It's full of citrus fruits. It's there are two small cities, and they're tiny villages between 500 to 2,000 inhabitants. It's a very fertile area. And first they used to do sugarcane, and then Moscato, and then in the mid-19th century, they started with citrus fruits, and now they're all citrus fruits. So with a system of irrigation, which came from the Arabs. And this area was described by many navigators as being the most fertile in Europe. This area, as I was saying, in the 70s, began with the speculation of building by the sea. They did the first, you see these horrible buildings close to the beach, badly built. Then a second line, and the third line. And then it got to a point in the year 2000 about where, well, before that, there were lots of little villages, and everybody wanted the industrial area. There was a little engineer who said, look, instead of having many industries, let's do one industry for everyone. But everybody wanted their own. So you enter into the village, and around it, it's all industrial area. So in the year 2000, the building had already been savaged, and many were put in jail. What did they do? Basically, they would buy agricultural land, go to the town hall, pay, and get the opportunity to build. In the year 2000, I was part of a platform. They were all foreigners. And they told us, you're romantic enemies of progress, and nothing was done. It was a defeat. And in my village, I went from 500 to 1,000 inhabitants in just a very short time. So I got hold of an architect who is specialist in urbanism, and I said, look, you've got a model. This valley is a model of new towns. It's a city garden. And these little towns are city gardens. They're productive gardens. You've got an orchard, and you've got and every owner can have his own vegetables. But even this was useless. But then, but we must consider who arrived in 1609. I mean, I'm the fifth generation specialist in agriculture. We had valleys of citrus fruit, and in the middle of the 90s, my father said, oh, my next door neighbor is dead and nobody wants the land, so why don't I buy it? I mean, in the family, if you don't have land, you're no longer part of that. So I bought it and said, let's do a little collection of citrus fruits, of old citrus fruits that don't exist anymore. And, so we had 6,000 meters. Then in 2009, I was working with Amadea, with Richard Hamilton, on a book on Udi called Food for Thought, Thought for Food. And I went together with him in Perpignan in the south of France. And there I see a greenhouse with a whole lot of citrus fruits in a place which was cold. And so then I discovered, I didn't know at the time, I said, how is it possible that they can't have citrus fruits? They have them, and instead me in my land, Valencia, nobody's done all this. Why don't you? And he said, oh, what a good idea. So with that land, he bought a bit nearby and said, I'll do a little collection of 50 citrus fruits. And I began little by little. But then in 2012, I learned that the town, which a few years ago had doubled, they'd take all of the citrus fruits, destroy the landscape to do a with these huge roads, streets, 30 meters wide. I said, this is terrible. This is destruction. And that's where I had the idea. And I said, what if I buy the land? I buy that from my neighbors and do a foundation for citrus fruit. A foundation, a private foundation of citrus fruits planted in the land. I went to the mayor and I made this proposal. And the mayor said, okay, let's stop the project, but you've got to buy everything from all of your neighbors. So I did it. I began buying one neighbor, then the other one, then the neighbor. And we got to, now we have 60,000 square, is it meters or kilometers? And we've got another one near the industrial area behind another village, another town, which comes up close to us. And now we are doing the same thing. And let's say that to do this, I had to go into research. I mean, I knew nothing about citrus fruits. I saw what was there in the ground, but I wasn't an expert in any way. There were 10, 15 I knew a little about. So I started doing my research, and just by trial and error. And I began buying the citrus plants, and I began some varieties. Now we've come to 5 trees, the minimum per variety. We've come to 400 varieties. And for me, this is like building a museum. You've got to have a rhythm, but you've got to follow botanics. You've got to follow science. And I began planting. Then the year after, I had to replant because I'd made some mistakes. And when I was doing research, I realized that what I was doing wasn't right. But in the end, I discovered that the first collector of citrus fruits was Cosimo de' Medici in the middle of the 17th century, the 1600s. So this is how art and horticulture come together. And then I learned that in Florence, in the 1400s, for humanists, horticulture was one of the arts. And especially in horticulture, there was the culture of citrus fruits, because it referred to Hercules, to one of the works of Hercules when he stole the golden fruits, the golden apples. And this brought me to thinking that it was a garden, a productive garden. So the origin of the garden goes back to Persia. And in fact, down there, the garden is called paradise. And the garden was the place where there was meditation. It was the place closest to paradise. And then the Arabs brought this concept to Spain and referred to the closed gardens, where all of the senses were engaged. Not only smell, taste, shape, also the sound that the water gave and the birds singing. I recovered some channels of irrigation that are no longer in use because everything is done with the drip now. You don't want to waste water. I converted some of these channels of irrigation into fountains with fish, each different from the other. And I asked an architect to transform my father's old shed into a laboratory for research, also for essential oils. And we, where he had his office, we did a little museum of products and also of prints of the 3 great treaties of citrus fruits. The first dates back to 1654. It's an Italian, Ferraris, then Folcamer. and the other version was published. And the third is the middle of the 1700s, and then Risopator, the middle of the 1800s, and then so a whole collection with the original prints of these treaties. And we're open from October through to April, when everything begins to mature and you can taste. We do guided visits where people, first we explain the history of citrus fruits. Basically, they were born 8 million years ago at the feet of the Himalayas, northeast of India, north of Burma, in the province of Yunnan in the south of China. And from there, they are distributed to the whole areas of the Mediterranean. And then, after having told the story, we do tasting and also smelling, and so smell and taste. And in the visit is as if one were going through a museum, except we don't need to change the collection because the trees change. I mean, the fruits change, the light changes, the clouds change, and it attracts all of the senses. And the foundation has been declared for environmental defense because we saved this landscape for the future. So I thought we could do other museums for others. And now this is my museum, and this is my legacy for the future generations. I'm sorry you can't see the pictures. Oh, you did? Okay, good. It's open from October through April. We'll have some evenings where we can present this museum because it's connected with what we're trying to do here. And then when the Assessore Prato will be taken, so they're planning orchards within the city to save the space and the trees together and oxygen. Now, Mr. Berger, can you connect?
Tobias, ci sei?
Hello.
Tobias, can you hear us?
Yes, in the McDonald's in Catania.
Guarda, non ti si vede la faccia. Eccolo, Tobias.
Now we can see you.
Please.
Yes. What?
Con Tobias stiamo facendo dei
With
progetti.
Tobias, we are pursuing several projects. Can you hear me? Okay.
The point, maybe,
Yeah.
about the project
you do.
in Beste.
You do that?
Vai. Go.
Project with this. Okay. Maybe we can do it together a little bit. And you hear me? You hear me?
Sì, ti sentiamo.
We can hear you.
Okay. The project the best started out that Mario brought together scientists from Florence who is changing making planters and growing plants in order to change the lights, the air in certain areas. And in the Beste, which is a company from Prato, they made this what you called, Mario. Maybe you also talk about it a little bit because the project started before I was involved, and they planned something which is called kind of a fabrication for fresh air, right? And in this project, they already prepare kind of a greenhouse where certain plants are growing in order to not having to have machines that clean the air, and also a little bit controlling the temperature through certain processes of water
Ich brauche meine Bordkarte. Ich nehme meine Bordkarte.
and sorry, and kind of instead of air conditioning, we can also use the transformation of the plants are able to produce. But mainly it's about the fresh air, and it's quite fascinating how little of space you need in order to produce oxygen for relatively big space. And I was coming in at a certain moment to kind of, you could say, give that whole thing a certain kind of framework. So I was planning to construct the greenhouse, and also a big wall, because it's not only the greenhouse but also kind of one wall of the factory inside was completely covered with or will be completely covered with climbing plants. And then I came in and I was asked to give that a certain kind of framework. And then I thought about different possibilities of what can be useful. And then I since a long time, I'm interested in the growing and use and possibilities of fungi, of mushrooms. Not necessarily only what like the biggest part of a mushroom is not what you see. It's not, for example, if we eat porcini or something, is that's just a tiny part of what the mushroom is. And the mushroom is quite a fascinating, what can you say? It's not an animal, it's not a plant, it's a mushroom. And the biggest part of the mushroom is the mycelium, which is usually under the earth. The biggest living thing, you could say, on earth is a mushroom in I think California and Arizona, which is a couple of 100 kilometers long, and it's one living thing. So I learned a bit about what they can do, and it's totally crazy what the mushrooms are able to do. It's a living thing that is billions of years old, and they have crazy capabilities of transformatory processes. For example, you can teach a mushroom to eat all kind of poisonous things, and they will be able to transform it into completely decomposable biological mass. And and then I thought, like, if we could make something where not just the plants that produce fresh air on the ecological side, I started to think if we could make objects and structures with the help of mushroom. And in the north of Italy, we found a company that has already developed being able to control processes with mushrooms up to an extent where they can actually make material. It's something that has been in the last 10 years, not only, we heard a lot lately about how psychoactive mushrooms are being able to be considered for use for medical reasons, for psychological reasons, and that the scientific processes after it's been forbidden for such a long time. Scientific processes have been started again with psychological mushrooms, but also in other fields. There has been very interesting research in the last couple of years. For example, also Adidas will bring out a sneaker next year, which is completely made out of mushroom. There is a lot of processes, building material, packaging material is made out of mushroom. And yeah, and this company in able to make it into usable building products. And so we started to research into the idea that not only, as you said, the plants and the production for the fresh air can be a process that is done with entirely natural material, but also material that is part of a process. As I said before, you know, that you can use, because mushrooms are basically able to, and they're not really eating and digesting, but they can transform products. So it's a kind of a digesting process. So they can be, for example, used to heat up all day. They can eat plastic. They can eat McDonald's. They can eat anything, and digest it and transform it into this kind of non-poisonous usable product that is decomposable again, and that's super interesting also for industry that deals with trash and all kinds of things. So the idea is that the whole work from the plant, from the production of fresh air into, you know, into the making of the object that are necessary for the plants to be able to do that. For example, this the structure of the greenhouse, the structure of on the big wall at the end of the big hall of the factory to construct the mesh, so to say, where plants could grow onto and climb up on the whole wall and make that kind of full on, so that even the aesthetic sides of that structure that we need is part of this kind of turnaround or process of processing or bringing even like the up to the structural and aesthetic part, the whole thing into a kind of process that is turnover, kind of fully functions in itself. Mario, did I say everything we know about the project by now? Or
Sì, Toby.
do you have a
Sì,
little contribution as well?
I wanted to introduce the project and the people here before. Oh, you introduced the
No. I mean,
best.
yeah. I mean, I thought I was
Better if you
introducing
talk
it,
about.
but I
if you
did,
want.
no?
Sì, ma allora.
So that's what I was talking about the whole time. That's why I'm asking you. Do you want to add something to it?
So, aggiungi.
Please feel free to add anything. Okay.
Il progetto di cui parlava Tobias.
So the project Tobias was speaking about, and I'm quite familiar with it. I didn't have the chance to introduce it because since Tobias is about to take off, I did not want to delay his departure because he was actually kind enough to spend a little bit of time with us, although he's about to depart. for another project in another city. And so I didn't have the chance to explain or to introduce what Tobias was talking about. So within the city of the future project, with the help of Councillor Barberis, well, we would like to change the industrial cluster, just like Tobias was saying earlier. So the low-income housing and the industrial areas are, I mean, those constructions that were built during the democratic times. And so that's where we have to work for future generation. We have to start working. So I met this company along with Tobias and Valerio, the Beste company, along with Stefano Mancuso. Tobias Reberger is realizing a project that is going to be an air factory. So plants that clean up air in a very concentrated manner. And so it's going to be an art factory. As Tobias was saying with the mushrooms, this is a place where people really work. So it's going to be a project where art is striving to improve people's life, and within this company that I was telling you about. So this is a commercial company. So I really briefly summarized a bit better, and hopefully, I was supposed to give you a few words of introduction, but considering the very little available time, I let Tobias speak first. So Tobias is actually working. I mean, if you came to Colle yesterday, you saw Tobias work in the pictures of the Archaeological Museum. And in fact, since 1999, when he worked with us for Arte all'Arte for the first time. We have been friends since then. He actually created this project with some lamps that were actually getting in touch with the city of Montevideo, ideally, of course, because the internet connections at the time were kind of complicated. At the time, we could have never had a meeting like the one we are having today. But also, we didn't even have time, money to actually have a true connection. And so this Via delle Volte became a place where people from Colle Valdelsa used to go, and they were getting in touch with Montevideo, probably a city that no one had ever seen. And so we had other projects. We built two bunkers, one in Poggibonsi, still kind of existing, and the other one in Siena. This was 2005. The municipality of Siena asked us to destroy the piece of art that the artists donated, because the artwork in Staggia Senese is still there, and we're asking for help to all of you. We could still take it and actually get it to work again. It was basically a bunker that Tobias and Olaf have together in Germany, and it was divided in these cities for the last year of Arte all'Arte. And so our friendship continued over time. His work transforms everyday life space into something else. If you go to Venice, if you go to the gardens, the coffee shop that actually was awarded, whose prize was awarded to Tobias, well, it was a magic space, but it's no more. So art can be everywhere, perhaps even in McDonald's. I don't know, but if Tobias is there, probably art is in McDonald's as well. So thank you very much for his presentation, and hopefully, we'll see you next year at the best company next year.
That's all.
Ciao.
Happy conference.
Adesso c'è Loris, il nostro Loris.
And now I would give the floor to Loris So we are going from Milan to Siena to Prato to anywhere.
Continua.
The best known artist in China. He works with us at the Galleria Continua and did a wonderful work in Prato. It's very interesting to be here. It's very interesting to be here because the subjects sum up together the passion of nature, the passion of culture, the passion of aesthetics, language, public space. For me, these subjects are a part of research. And I was thinking of the trailers that I used to do 20 years ago with plants inside. So private spaces in relation with an idea of nature, cactus as an element of danger, in the sense that the conformation, their form, the physiology of that particular plant is not calming in any way. What I find very interesting generally is how we can influence, how our generation can influence the involvement as artists in planning of cities. In Italy, for instance, this doesn't take place very much, and artists are not very ready from the point of view of relationships with bureaucracy, with security. There's a whole series of constraints as one goes into the public context, which generally for an artist are secondary, but at an operational level are not. So in this sense, the last episode, this donation of a great sculpture by the Casa Risparmio di Prato to the city of Prato has been an experience, a fantastic experience for me in the relationship with the territory, in the relationship with the public, trying to understand the reactions of work and of your mark, of your idea of language, which interacts with the public without trying, that is to say, trying not to get the work of art to fall into the public space, because otherwise the risk is to have reactions which are contrary. What I mean to say is that when we do operations which have to do with the public, we have to share the project together with the people, introducing the project and trying to find reactions. And this is done by architects and often is done in projects of competition, the fact of involving the social texture in relationship with the artist. In Turin, for instance, they have been working on the territory for quite some years now, trying to introduce projects which are directly connected with the districts, with the type of people who live in an area. So we wish to share as many projects as possible as from the point of view of language, because the public needs to be educated language-wise. And so we wish to welcome actions in the social texture where art is related and has an important role. But I also believe very much in what Anthony was saying about this acupuncture done through aesthetics, because aesthetics goes beyond the historical contingency. Beauty is beauty, and it lasts. It is lasting. So what I would want to add is that I was thinking of the 7,000 oaks by Beuys before 1982. That work, that action is also acupuncture. I couldn't define it anyhow else. And if we think that that work was done 40 years ago, there already was an approach, a statement, a sensitization. It was in front of Frederiksberg's castle. And that work certainly has planted the seeds for something more in a small portion of the public. And then today we all speak of art and nature, quality. So it's an operation, it's a foundation of citrus fruits, as we've heard, and it means work around art because it is giving to an organism, a living organism, a true status. And so this should oblige us to think once again that rivers have a status. In fact, they should be protected as subjects, as institutional subjects. They should have legal protection. And most certainly, my children who are 12 and 14, who would really very much love this relationship with the legal subject, because today they consider us a generation who's produced plastic and who couldn't give it, couldn't care less. I mean, we've destroyed the planet in 150 years of industry. And clearly the adolescents today tend to immediately blame us. In this sense, I believe that all of the operations, and that's why I was talking about the relationship with the context, are it's very important to introduce them in the at school age, because otherwise the whole thing remains something in the cultural elite where certain responsibilities exist, but things are to be explained to children from early on. A bit like Gormley's figures in front of a supermarket in the square. In this way, they should be communicated. And so from my point of view, I repeat, I try as an artist, I'm very much tied to a type of language and a type of way which is far from the natural organism. I try and learn from a cultural transformation that we've had in our studies. Very many of my sculptures are based on L systems. They are diagrammatic structures invented by Americans to represent graphically the growth and development, rhizomatic development of plants. I think that I very much like to build this relationship between technology, engineering, and the relationship with the biological and organic world, which we immediately feel to be filtered. I want the filter to be felt, the cultural filter of technology to be felt. And that is how we see this abstraction, this cooling down, this loss of a form of romanticism. And in this direction, also the sculpture of Prato is emblematic, because for me to bring to these open diagrams a diagram on the context where it is a design. If we take away all of the letters and numbers, all that remains is a drawing of vectors, of strengths, of forces. And that drawing assumes a number of different dynamics, a number of different meanings. And I would like my work to be like this, that it would not have be read in a univoque fashion, but it could consider other spheres too, leaving aside the idea of marvel for the spectator, And I must say that I read many things by Koch, and he speaks a lot about the metaphysical valency of the language of art, which is something particular. I wish to say that, yes, we can commit ourselves socially, but basically art has a poetic function which all other works do not have, all other human activities do not have, which is to be defended and protected, which is the most important thing. So this is how I close, and I hope that in all of the public projects which are necessary, we will still be thinking about a minimum of poetry, of poetic thought, which helps to educate citizens. That's why I insist on the idea of beauty. Thank you, Loris.
Siamo perfettamente d'accordo su questa sua
Yes,
impostazione.
I agree with what you say, absolutely. And from this year onwards, the Association Arte Continua will also consider didactics of art together with the public administration. I'd like to give the floor to our friend from Denmark, from the Superflex group. They're a group of 3 artists who interact with the communities where they do action, the types of activities that he will be telling us about. And they have found space for activity which have become proper places of daily life, and they interact with specific spaces, and he will tell us better exactly what they do.
I don't know if I am able to control the website, or you have to, okay. Anyway, I'm part of an artist collective called Superflex, based in Copenhagen. And we have worked together for 30 years now. And we started with the idea of proposing or dissolving the concept of the artist genius and creating a collective body, the artist Superflex. So in a sense, we work for Superflex. So this leads to a general understanding of in our studio, and our thinking is that, you know, art is life, life is art. We believe that we believe in the collective in the widest extent. We believe that you know, a collective is more than 2, same as you guys here. And from that point on, we started developing our way of working. And now we have a bigger studio. We have 20 people working with us, anthropologists, artists, different specialists. And we then started to say, okay, if we want to move beyond our individual, even beyond the collective artist Superflex, we need to be active in the public space. So we were fortunate enough to win a competition of doing a public space, of a 1 kilometer public space called Superkilen in Copenhagen. It's an area, maybe you can scroll down and you find Superkilen. I'll just continue talking. So it's an area, you have to go down to Superkilen. No, it's fine, it's fine. Leave it, it's okay. So it's a, well, if you go a little down, all works over there. Sorry, a little further down. And you will find Superkilen, sorry, a little further. It comes here on the right. Yeah. So it's an area in Copenhagen that has 70 different nationalities. So it's a very complex, culturally, also economically. It used to be a tram trail. It was totally derelict. It was an area where, you know, most people didn't dare to go. There was gang wars, police all the time. So very insecure space. So we decided together with the architects Bjarke Engels, Big, to make a strict concept that you will see in the art world, a conceptual strong framework. So we would choose an area, a multiple space area. We would paint red. There was one that was called black, one that was green. You can scroll down. And then we decided that every object should come from somewhere else. So it should reflect the people living in the area. A little bit similar to actually looking at people and their history and so on, and giving that value. So everyone was proposing objects of desire, of memory, from another place. So all of the objects come from somewhere else, and they all carry a narrative. So next to each object, there's a signage saying in Danish and in Arabic, for example, a bench from Baghdad. When you sit on the bench, it's a bench that has functions, but it's also a narrative. It's also a story. And then so it becomes a very playful space. You can scroll, just scroll down. You stop whenever you think. So it becomes a space that has created a sense of ownership, has created a sense of storytelling. So we then went even further, because normally I think it's also in Italy that when you do a public space, you have to have citizens involved. Often that's kind of not such a democratic process, because most of those who participate, often men between 60 and 70 years old, who think they represent everyone. So we decided to do something we call participation extreme. So we went out and worked with people in the area, and we chose to work primarily with the youngsters and the elderly, those who use public space the most. So we asked them, what would you like to have? Where would you like to travel? So if you go down, so this hill, just look at this hill now, and you move down a little further. So we asked two young girls with Palestinian descent what they would like to bring back from Palestine. They said, we would like to bring back some soil. Normally, if one goes to Palestine, you bring a little bit of glass back from Palestine as a remembrance of the lost land. If we go further down, so they said, we would like to go to Palestine, to Gaza, to our grandmother's olive orchard, and bring back 4 cubic meters of soil. This now forms the hill in Copenhagen. So, and again, people in the area, this is called participation extreme. So taking it really, the participatory element to the extreme. I also went to Jamaica with 2 young kids who are hip hoppers. They said, we would like to have a sound system from Jamaica. Crazy idea. But we went there, if you scroll down. So I went to Jamaica, and they found a sound system they liked, and we copied it 1-to-1 in concrete. And now everyone in the city of Copenhagen can go with the iPhone and use the sound system. So it's an area that has created a strong sense of ownership through a strong narrative, but also a strong concept. So really, and some people hate the place because it looks like, a civilization of public space. But Copenhagen is a very homogeneous place. Before we started 10 years ago, there was only one bench, the Copenhagen bench in public space. Now we have 200-300 objects. So it's also the trees come from somewhere else. So everything is from somewhere else. So everything carries a narrative. So moving from expanded participation and the expanded collective, if we go back to the beginning of the site, we moved on to what we call interspecies living. So really taking into consideration all other species. So moving beyond the human perspective. If we go to the top. And you stop with the one in the top, interspecies campus. Yeah. So basically going beyond a human perspective, and then considering the agencies of all the other species, and taking their desire, their aesthetical desires, their living conditions, their voices, you could say. Normally, of course, they are not heard, and we try to interpretate. So we work with scientists of all fields in trying to understand, particularly ocean life. So we were expedition leaders of a boat in the Pacific, and we decided to learn from everything in the ocean, the preferences of corals, of fish, of organisms. And through that, we, among others, came across something called a coralline algae, which is pink, and coral polyps, which are creatures. They love this color. And then they swim towards it, or they move towards it. And then they build the infrastructure that we know in the ocean as coral reefs, the most biodiverse organisms, or you would say architecture or infrastructure. So the ocean gave us the color pink. It also gave us a clear indicator of that the right angle is the wrong angle. So if we keep as humans building straight lines, there's not really so much we can attach to. So that is one parameter we use to design. So we then looked at, so what is the most classical thing for humans to build with? Bricks, which is basically natural material, clay, sand, and heat. So we designed together with some of the best brick makers. You can scroll down. We designed together with some of the best brick makers in Denmark, 12 different bricks that can only create curved structures. From the idea about that you need to maximize surface. The more surface you maximize, the more life can happen on structures. So this is, so when you look at this is in a university in Copenhagen called Roskilde University. All of the structure and the infrastructure are straight lines, straight blocks. So you have to get as fast as possible from A to B. So we said we need to interrupt the human behavior by that before you go to the cafeteria, you have to go to the lecture hall, the administration, you're forced to go through a structure, the structure here, that it forces you to go in a different tempo, curved and also stop. Because maybe the most important lecture to learn, both post-COVID, but also in general, is that we have sometimes to stop up and act idle, take a pause, before we then are able to listen and learn from other species, from other creatures, from other plants. Because first then we can start to build different infrastructure. If you go a little further down, scroll down a little bit. So you can see here, we stop here. So you can see all of the bricks are either, embedded with sand, so burnt with sand. So it becomes an organic structure that also over time peels off and drops down to the floor. So there's holes and cracks and surfaces. If you move down a little further, and you scroll a little bit more down, and then go down to the bottom. And as you were mentioning before, so this is the university you see up there. Go a little bit up. A little bit up. So you look here. So all of the lines are straight. So what we also did is that we work with people who live and work in the university, and we transformed them to act as fish, as polyps, and organisms. So they were also, we used a hypnotist to transform them into have an alter ego also. And then they helped us choose different sites around the campus. So there's 10 different sites where you can go to, and there's these, let's say, pink coral structures popping up that you can sit on and you can engage with. What you mentioned before is to give agency to plants, to oceans, to lakes. If you scroll a little bit down. So we developed what we call the construct for the interspecies campus. We work with lawyers, particularly one who is a specialist in natural law, and we defined the way that you can interact with these structures. So it is between the human and all species, the singular human. So before you enter, you have to accept the conditions that is laid out in the contract. Among others, as it states, by entering the interspecies campus, the human commits to interspecies living. They must slow down and listen to all species. They must learn from all species. They must live in caring relationship with all species as part of an expanded collective. So it becomes a part of a discussion, a narrative, a storytelling at the university. And maybe interesting here, you say on behalf of all species, but also the construct is governed by the laws of nature and interspecies ethics. All of us here can then consider, so what is interspecies ethics? So it's up to each one of us to then consider, what does it mean? How can I act differently to this structure? If you go back to the beginning of the site. And you take this one here, vertical migration. So humans have this tendency to gather in assemblies. This is during the General Assembly in the UN headquarters in New York last year in September. And politicians come in there and they said we have to discuss biodiversity. We have to discuss what do we accept as a raise of temperature. What are the consequences? But we have forgotten something. We have forgotten to invite those who are deepest influenced by our consequences of human behavior. So in our swimming in the ocean in the Pacific, we in the night came across an animal which is called a siphonophore, which are these jellyfish creatures that are between 40 meters long, and they come from the twilight zone, from the really dark, up to the surface every night. It's the world's biggest vertical migration every night. They come to the surface and they chew everything that is organic. So they take everything down to the seabed where it stores. So this is one of our most important allies. So we filmed them and we made an animation. You can scroll to the next. And then that is projected 145 meters onto the building of the UN. So while the politicians are discussing, the other species are present and also have a voice. If you scroll down. So this was during 4 days of the General Assembly. It was almost like a dancing alien creature. And here you can see it on the left. So surely we can talk much more, but I just wanted to introduce the concept of interspecies living, interspecies architecture. And there's much more to look at, and I'm for the invitation. And yeah.
Grazie, grazie Oggi. Sorry for cut your intervention, very interesting, and we will do the project next time together, I think, in the town, in Italy, or maybe in Copenhagen or other part of the world. Now, ora c'era il nostro amico architetto che
Now we have our architect friend who does something else, but is also an architect. I think you know him. The work that Mario Cucinelli is doing is very important, and I'm very proud that he's an Italian architect to bring this question of energy saving in daily life. He's done a lot the world over, and it's very important that he's teaching and he's helping the young in a school that he founded in 2015 to work on their synergy in the aim of safeguarding the planet. I wanted to ask him, very often I've asked him to help us make these social housings into works of art. That's why I asked him to listen to the others, the artists, and I'm sure he knows anyway. But the sense is the intervention that he will make and the institutions will make is this: to create meetings amongst people so that something can be done as soon as possible. Mario, you have the floor. Good morning. I was very interested in listening to the many things that have been said, and they crossroads with the world of architecture, which is another world of that of artists. Unfortunately, there are different complexities. I don't want to say that it's easier or more difficult, but they are different. But going back to what was presented, brought me to mind two things I wish to tell you, two little stories which talk about the transformations like that of the orange grove. At the beginning of the 1900s, a garden, a subtropical garden was created in the west part of Ireland, in the province of Cork, which is the part of Ireland which gives unto the Atlantic. And a passionate English general during the occupation of that land bought an island in a very deep fjord. He brought seeds from his travels all over the world. And together with the landscape architect, who was the landscape architect who did the botanical garden in Belfast, they transformed an island where it seemed impossible to plant plants. And they were very far-sighted because it was a hostile environment. It was a huge environment. There was a lot of wind. So the trees had a hard time growing. And this landscapist did a sort of frame of bushes, which adapted to the salty sea. And in having the bush grow, he created a protection where the cones could grow strong enough to then be able to resist the wind. But in growing this system, this equilibrium, there was something, the only factor which was stopping the plants from growing was the wind. The other factors were humidity, because it was a fairly warm wind because there was the Gulf Stream nearby. So doing this landscape operation today, that island, it's called Garnish Island, is a subtropical garden, and it's a botanic garden where there are 2,500 subtropical types of plants, which is visited by 250,000 people a year in the northern part of Europe. So it means to say, I mean, we're not always only able to destroy. Sometimes we can be an accomplice with the nature, and we can build positive things, because we have this, we tend to have this idea that all we can do is destroy. Even if Hadrian, the emperor, in Marguerite Yourcenar's book says there are two, the book is fantastic, but there are two pages where the emperor says architecture is built in cooperation with the landscape. And from there starts a text of this relationship where we modify in determining fashion the whole of landscape to try to look for cooperation. We speak of the 1st century after Christ. Now, the other story I wish to say is another, but the whole point is that projecting an idea is what creates transformation of things. This is what we're talking about, whether it be done by an architect or by an artist. The theme is transformation. Anyway, to come back to the other story, in 1974, Walt Disney decided to build a ski station in Nevada in a national park. And of course, this created a whole lot of turmoil. And those who were committees for the defense of trees and the forests got to the point where they nominated a lawyer, Mr. Stone, who came up into court and had prepared a legal text for the defense of those who do not speak. And we could talk about people who don't know how to speak, but he was talking about the forests and the trees and the waters of the rivers and the rocks. They can't speak, and so I am defending them. So we want to create a charter for those who can't defend themselves. And the lawsuit was lost because in the United States, the laws are very different from ours. So since he wasn't defending a physical person. But anyway, Walt Disney understood the whole point. And he understood that building a ski station against the will of committees would have been negative for the image of his company. And so we didn't do it. So the strength of protest is very important because it raises the level of the discussion, but there's the defense of fragile environments who could not speak. That should be our concern, our first concern, because we are thinking, I mean, here we are talking about the environment. The environment is not here. I mean, who is representing the environment personally? No one. So working with Stefano Mancuso, the theme of this relationship, city and nature, what we're talking about, is a losing with nature, because the subject is not at the table. Nobody is saying what are their rights or what are their themes. So we are facing a problem that in order to create an equilibrium, because the production of CO2 in the world has gone beyond the capacity the plants have to absorb it. This is a threshold that has been reached and surpassed. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to plant more trees, but we're doing nothing to reduce the emission of CO2. And this is something that won't work, because the data for those who go around the world, the ADH said in their trillions of trees, and we should plant another 1 trillion. That's an infinity. We need to overthrow the whole policy of the whole world. But we're not talking about we're ready to give up because we're doing an operation like, look, we've been tinkering around for 250 years, and now please can you solve the problem? But it doesn't seem to be a good form of reasoning. We're the ones who are asking nature to solve a problem of ours because we're not able to solve it. So on cities, there's an equation which will never work. we can't have millions and millions of trees. It's not enough, never be enough, but we also need new urban policies that will state that we have to give up on something else. I don't mean to say that we have to give up on what's fundamental, but there are many things which we could give up and we could keep on living well to reduce the impact on the environment. This is a question that does not appear on the tables of politicians. All we say is we're going to plant a whole lot of trees, but we'll never manage to plant enough in a city. It's true that the equilibrium is planetarian, but to give you an idea, a building of 20,000 square meters, built with the laws we have today, has a need for compensation of 50,000 trees. Okay, try and multiply 20,000 square meters by all of those who want to build. We wouldn't have the space to plant all those trees. So we are faced with the idea that we have to plan our cities differently. We have to build in a different way, and we have to, unfortunately, start taking care of what we have done. Because like you said, the social housing, the only one who spoke about poverty in building is Pope Francis, and this should make us think. The fact that it's a man of the church who has to talk about this and not a politician. There's poverty in food, poverty in economy, and poverty in building. People who live in buildings that are not adequate, not only to their style of life, but are not adequate to those changes which are happening and which will be paid for by those people who live in the buildings for the poor. Those who don't have necessary insulation, who don't have those minimum criteria to guarantee to people a decent life within a change, which is evident. So there are many emergencies that we have to work upon, knowing that the theme of subject matter is of raw materials is fundamental, because we've been concentrating on the policy of consumerism. We've tried to get people to consume less and our buildings to consume less. We've managed to achieve some results, because compared to a building of 30 years ago, an office building 30 years ago was consuming a lot more per square meter. Today in Class A, they consume much less. 30, 40. So we've done a huge leap. So it's a considerable technological effort. But on raw material, we've not done much, because we keep building with cement, with iron, because buildings have to stand up one or other. We've got a lot to do before we can build with mushrooms. But maybe bit by bit, we'll be able to discover new materials, and we'll discover that we can build with other materials, and maybe half of the CO2 emissions aren't at the moment when we use it, but the moment when we build. So all of the materials that exist before. So we've concentrated on the easiest part. Now we have to concentrate on the most difficult part, the production of the new generation. So when we talk about materials, and I presented a research at the Salone del Mobile, there is a world which is changing, because there are companies that do panels with fish scales. There's a huge production of fish in the world. There's a lot of residue products, and these swamps are used to make panels, wall panels. And there is a company in Europe somewhere, they're Italians, in fact, and it produces phono-absorbent panels, and they're made by the roots of mushrooms. So as a company, they have a company that produces mushrooms. So somebody eats, and then what is left over, they make these phono-absorbent panels. So there are lots of examples of companies that are working on a new generation of materials, because those materials come from the world of what is left over, of residue, the world of industrial residue, which today can produce a second life for materials. For instance, they make a leather with the peel skins of mangoes. There's an Italian company making a product called Orange Fiber. It uses the cellulose of the skin of oranges to make textiles. So there's a whole world which is slowly trying to find a different road, a different path. Architecture is a different problem. It's complicated, it's difficult. You're lucky because you can work outside of the rules. I can't work outside of the rules. So I have an extra difficulty to surpass because I'm doing something which is exciting, of course, because there is art, but there is architecture, and we've got to do extraordinary buildings. And his work is fantastic because it's a meeting of architecture, art, public space. It's fantastic. But then buildings have to work. I mean, they've got to stand up. You've got to live inside of them. So it's more complicated. So in my opinion, there's a theme which is which is not gone into thoroughly. We used to have social housing for people after the war. We did a campaign. I don't know if you remember the Inakama program. When it was done, they didn't call in a cousin of a president or a friend of a minister. They called Giancarlo De Caro, a generation of young architects who were the most promising. And there was a season of architecture, of very high level social housing that had fixed the bar also for private building. And it's the public who said to the private sector, this is how we have to build. So you can remember how apocalyptic it was in recent years. Nobody built social housing anymore. Somebody said at a certain point, okay, let's get the private enterprise to social housing. This never took off because it doesn't work. Because you can't ask a private person, okay, can you build houses and without economic return? And maybe in fact, you've got to give us some money as well. I mean, but the market doesn't work like that. So returning to public or social housing is the first piece of the puzzle, because work and housing are the two main pillars of welfare. We know because of the struggles that have been seen. I know there are some public exponents here and their strength, their possibility. It's a question of policy. It will be very important if we could see a re-beginning of public housing, because a type of civilization like ours, we're the seventh most industrial country in the world. I think we're amongst the richest country, at least we live in a nation of wealth. If we are a country where there's a great deal of wealth. Sure, there are difficult situations as well. Yesterday on the newspaper, it said there are 2 million people who are beneath the threshold of poverty. Sure, we see these things, but I'm asking collectively, in one of those cities where one of the highest levels of well-being and wealth, we aren't able, from the political and economic point of view, to increase the level of the life of the poor. Those who are rich remain rich. The middle class is having ever more difficulty, and who cares about the poor? So this is the logic we have to deal with now. So the theme of social housing now, as you were saying, you are a dreamer, and it's good for the heart and good for the life of all, but we should build as best we could in the conditions for everyone. Not this doesn't mean building in a costly fashion, because there's always a misunderstanding on the fact that we have to do beautiful things, that they cost a lot. But beautiful things, sure, might cost a lot. I've just finished a museum, and I say that it doesn't happen every day to have a client who'll spend masses of money. But what can also make beautiful things and say that beauty is its simplicity. Building houses where the theme of construction and quality and exchange with nature and art are not things. I mean, we've done them. I'm thinking of Vienna after the war. We've done beautiful things where art is always an important element, because the architects also had an artistic component. Because I'm not an artist in the pure sense of the word, but it's obvious that inside my work there is a component of emotion, of artistic emotion, of sensitive emotion, which is very important and which we've somehow lost, because contemporary cities, I don't call it, the modern cities have lost the struggle on quality and beauty. So we've introduced a system of laws to guarantee the quality of people, and this process is not able to produce beauty. So if I go and look at cities today, San Gimignano, sure, I mean, we're talking one of those beautiful places in the world, but I'd like to look at the regulations of San Gimignano, when it was built at the time, it wasn't all abusive. It was done with a plan, I'm sure. So where is it that we're not able to recreate that mechanism so that the economic and intellectual effort and creative effort cannot produce beauty? It can't be only exclusive. It's a theme which I always talk about. It's a theme of inclusion, not exclusion. It's too early. So in the theme of the home and this relationship with nature and art, we should maybe find a new season. So artists can do so, but since we're not the ones to build, the public authorities have to do it. So we have to be accomplices, and we have to share. What is missing here are not the means, because, for instance, the PNRR has masses of money, and nobody will be able to get it, go through with it, because 200 billion in 4 years, if you divide it per year and per month and per days, the capacity expense of a country with the management it has, with the enterprise it has, will never be able to build all that stuff in so little time. To give you an example, we're doing a tower in Milan, which is really costly, in a very difficult environment in the center of the city. We're not able to spend more than 4 or 5 million a month in our building. So try and multiply that by X and divide it by 200 billion. So we should have an organizational capacity which is outside the capacity of this country. So with those resources, let's do projects which we're able to bring to term. Call it school, call it social housing. I don't say museum, because the museum is not only the closed box, but call it the theme of greenery, welfare. There's lots of themes which maybe we should share, spread out upon. We should have some vision. The scarcest resource is creativity. We are a creative country, in quotation marks, but we have scarce vision, because the urbanistic plans are something terrible, the greatest failure of our century. Architects participate in the world of architecture. Only 2%, and the other 98% is built by different subjects. So I don't feel responsible for what is taking place, because our contribution in the overall globally is practically irrelevant, which makes us think that we're about to become extinct, because if 98% of what is built is not made by us architects, who is doing it? This is the point. So if only we do it, and we have so little influence, only 2%, even if our communication is extraordinary, because architecture today is the object of many publications and but the real cities are those where we go. We're down here, if we walk in the middle of these horrible buildings and the abandoned factories and so forth. So there's a lot to be done, and there's also a lot to be torn down, because we shouldn't always occupy. I mean, let's try and tear down and get rid of some of the horrible things. There is this logic, this speculation, which has been pursuing us, so that if we have something empty, we've got to fill it in. If we've got a factory, we've got to get it going again. But that's no longer the world as it was. We can't reoccupy everything. So maybe in the equilibrium of consumption, of using the soil, there's something we need to build, because if politics is that of saying zero consuming soil without adding the final word, which is net, because if you don't add the word net, it means we should no longer do anything, because if we didn't need schools, hospitals, infrastructure, it's not true. We do need these things. But we can take away some of the things that we no longer need. We take away hundreds of useless hangars, and let's make woods. But then we need schools, then we need instruments, we need investigations, we need to. But things have started going, so we've got to try and get things done. But what we can give, the contribution of this round table, of the work that you're getting done, is to give injections of creativity. Let's give them instruments, vision, because otherwise things won't move. So it's difficult then to say no. I always start from that point. I said that we could do something wonderful, beautiful there. You have to explain why you don't want to do it. Why don't you want to do it? I'm not saying why you're doing it, but I say, why don't you want to do it? We've got this plan, we've got this vision. So you've got to tell me why you don't want to do it. So that's where we have to come up with our ideas against people who don't have ideas. Thank you.
Molto stimolante.
Very interesting. What you said was definitely very interesting. I believe that we have to do these kind of things. We are here together because we want to try and do it. So thank you for being with us. As soon as we find the right place, we'll call you. So in the Prato, what in Prato, anywhere. Thank you very much for being with us, Mario. You have been recruited, Mario. Be careful. So what Mario was saying is the crux of the matter. We need to take down, constructions and buildings that we are not happy about anymore and create something new forms of life. Because also art is at the center. The artist does art pieces forever, but sometimes even if they last for very little, it's still, in his or her mind, the idea is to have something lasting forever. And this is something that we lost probably with our, social growth. And now I'd like to give the floor to Guido Poccianti, who is an entrepreneur and a friend with whom we have been trying to put together energy saving high tech, but also working on social housing and low income housing, involving architects and artists to work in those areas that hopefully will really invite the city to change. So let's start with those that have nothing. In fact, like Mario was saying, 2 million people are living below the poverty threshold. And so we need to have a strong public and private, alliance, so that we have resources for the not-for-profit. And Guido is actually very interested in this. And artists and architects had their say. Now let's see what we can really do. And then we'll give the floor to our other friends that will talk after. First of all, I'd like to thank Mario for having invited me. We have a dream, we share a dream with Mario, and Prato knows very well about it, but we were going to speak about it together at the end of my speech that is going to be quite brief. I come from the world of architecture because I build facades all over the world. I'll give you some simple examples. The music part in Florence, the Tiburtina station in Rome, where with clay we make facades, or the Antinori cellar. And so over 20 years experience, I patented an idea in different parts of the world that is quite, something easy, but no one ever applied for a patent. And that resolves the energy problem. Paris, for instance, is very careful about, because between now and 2035, we are going to have some serious problems. So I created something quite simple. Just imagine an existing building. This can be done on new buildings or existing buildings, but it is easier to understand that on existing buildings. Now we need to actually put, nowadays we actually put the insulation directly on the facades. I don't do that. I keep the insulation at 10 centimeters from the facade with a sort of an understructure. That allows me to create like a space. So let's say the facade of the building, let's put like a, piping that actually conveys air in that space throughout the winter and the summer. So in the summer, you are cooling down, you are using this air to cool down the wall, or in the winter to warm it up. And this is very important for energy saving, because it allows me to exploit and use the thermal inertia of the wall. So the wall actually increases of 1 degree in temperature every 10 hours. But also, once you turn off the heater, I mean, this hot air makes the heat stay for like 10 hours as well. So let's say in summertime, at nighttime, it is much cooler at night and much warmer or hotter in the summer. And whereas in the wintertime, it's the opposite. So in terms of insulation, I can have a saving of about 30%. It's a very high percentage because with the very little solar panels, just imagine 3 kilowatts every 100 meters, I can have a passive heating and cooling of a house, which is what the Paris Agreement is striving for. Also, just imagine that I'm going to have centimeters of air that needs to be warmed up all around the building. Whereas usually in single homes or individual apartments, you're warming up the air of the entire, I mean, the buildings. So you're saving a lot in terms of technology, but you're also saving a lot in terms of energy. And the greatest advantage is not just for energy saving, but actually it's quality of life. Imagine that you are not going to have like a fan coil actually, you know, having, I don't know, a fan working in your apartment in the summer or in the winter at different temperatures, you know, giving a hard time to your body. But remember, in my case, the air within the buildings doesn't change. So, you know, when you are walking within a building, imagine what it means that there is a lot of, you know, dust in people's home, and with the fans, air goes all over the place. And that is a cause for, you know, sometimes for cancer. So, but also humidity that is usually very important with my system, you know, especially in the summer, it acts like as a dehumidifier because the air goes through the coil that perhaps in the summer is at 6 degrees. Then it heats up because it goes along the top of the wall that is probably 20, that should be 24, 23 degrees. And then, so it goes up above the dew dew line, and it condensate. So as a result, I am actually drying up all the water in the walls, but also within the buildings. Whereas in winter time, you know, the air circulates at a temperature of 35 degrees. So you're drying up everything. So it is a very innovative system, quite simple. It's not easy to design, but it depends on the designers, of course. And it improves the quality of life, and you can have 30% cost saving for energy. What is my dream? What is our dream? Maybe I can leave the floor to Mario. Well, I will tell you. I have different prototypes that are being working. We are going to use that on low-income housing in Reggio Emilia. And we even thought about Prato, in the city of Prato, to take into account the low-income housing of Prato, because life is more complicated. People don't live well. There is a huge humidity. People don't have money to, you know, dry up their homes, humidity inside. And so also these homes are falling apart. Consider that humidity within walls is very dangerous because, you know, these buildings are made of concrete, but, you know, the iron inside is getting rusty. So if I remove the humidity, I can even improve the quality and duration of the buildings. So not only we would like to have this system on different buildings, but once we actually have like a passive consumption in terms of energy, you know, have great designers to design them so that low income housing that maybe are a little sad can really become an artwork. So the entire perimeter will become an artwork. So it's going to be the whole building that is going to be an inhabitable sculpture, and Loris knows about it. Stefano from the Pecci Center is the young director of the Pecci Museum, and we hope that he's going to be with us for a long time to come, because you need continuity in order to have transformations, and also you need to have, an active mind, behind any transformation in the territory. So we spoke to Stefano some time ago, and he realized, like Mario Cucinella was saying, sometimes welfare is made of information, and a museum, like I hope in my work, can be seen in the gallery. We understand what is really important, and we understand those who actually say that they are great artists or interpreters of the daily life, and instead they're not. Just like Mario Cucinella was saying, only 2% of buildings are made by architects. Same thing happens with art as well. Selection is paramount because it's a matter of information. You need to have a sort of like a sort of a public authority that guarantees me, private art lover, that what I'm doing or what I'm getting is actually well done. So I need to have a support. We need to have support by private individuals, so that we don't just have important clients, but everyone becomes an important client. And the political world has to be careful about not acting in an excessively direct manner, but rather being very constructive and protecting the autonomy of the cultural action. And so that's why we established the gallery, and we tried to establish the Association of Arte Continua, which is a non-profit organization that wants to support public authorities. So, the private sector must support the public authorities. If, not everything has been privatized, but you need, in a way, you need to have a good referee, in a soccer metaphor, directing all the different players. Otherwise, it's going to be a jungle. And Stefano, and then we'll give the floor to our friends of Poggibonsi and Prato.
Thank you, Mario, and good morning. What is fundamental for me when I arrived at the Centro Pecci is not only to reason on sustainability, but also the theme of inclusion. So when we talk about sustainable projects which are open to the whole of the citizenship, this is fundamental. Because starting from these situations where we talk as we do here, it's very important to know how to listen to many parts of society who, for the who we've mentioned, but who have not been able to really participate. So, for me, it is fundamental that at this point in time, we give the possibility to all to take part, and to, speaking of women also, of all of those communities who are making the territory rich, the territory of our cities. I'm thinking of Prato. There is a Chinese community which is very strong. And I think it's important that they become people who can be listened to, not for a question of quotas, but for a question of what the institutions and politics and those who as private persons can decide to invest upon to improve their life conditions. And they can receive from the opening of prospects which otherwise in the last centuries have never been given or seen, because they don't see the necessity. So it's fundamental also in thinking of the museum and in thinking of a center of contemporary art, which is more than a museum. It's a center which has a vision of the future, and therefore the need to single out those which are artistic transformations and vision. For those who are producing and are thinking and who have not maybe got a position to go farther. So make an intervention on education is very important, but also to think no longer that what the Center of Contemporary Art is a closed place where one has to go, but has to open to the citizens and open the territory. And then we have this mandate from the Tuscan region, which I think is very important to support and promote contemporary art within the region as a Center for Contemporary Art. And at Pecci, we're part of the Foundation for Contemporary Art in Tuscany. And this role is a role which brings ever more to a connection, to creating possibility of a relationship which threaten the modality with which we have reached today as a social construction, as a building construction. What I think I wish to launch is to have greater inclusion in these specific moments of tales and participation, so as to see these ideas emerge, which are interesting and which can and must be ever more upheld by a further participation and have to be listened to. And regarding beauty, which is fundamental, but not all have the possibility, as was being stressed, that not everybody has access to beauty, and walking out of the house and having beauty is not everybody can afford. And so being able to understand how interventions in different areas of territory can modulate with those who live, but also generate a constant comparison with institutions. And I'm thinking, for instance, in our center, the Pecci Center, being reached physically by public transportation or by a modality of access for those who don't have a car, or those who don't drive, is something which we're working on, and we are activating with the municipality, the region, and the public transport system to try and find ways to get people to us and to allow the children and young people who want to come to the museum but are not yet self-sufficient, to give the possibility of getting there. Also during school time, something tangible but difficult to achieve nowadays. So in considering inclusion, I am glad that there be this capacity to look to the ecosystem overall from every point of view. And that is why we have great possibilities, and we can count on different visions if we listen to them. And so I want to relaunch the subject. Now we're going to leave the last remarks to the municipality of Poggibonsi. Well, there's a lot happening in Prato, but we have to listen to what's happening here. It's very late, so I don't want to take up your time, but just now what I'm interested in is say just a few things, a few thoughts, just to get you to understand why something has been done in Prato and why in certain contexts Prato emerged for the urban policies, innovative policies. I want to try and give you the framework. Paradoxically, today we are living through a historical phase, a cultural phase, which is a very good phase, because it's obvious that we know what needs to be done. Rarely has it been so evident what must be done. And basically, the great themes are two. On the one hand, the climate emergency, and on the other hand, the social equality. They are connected, of course.
Poi in termini di politiche urbane.
In
però,
order to share with you some thinking about urban policies and politics, we need to remember something. As to the climate change emergency, well, we heard it for many years since, primary school, but then people forget. And when it comes to social equality, you don't need to go to the banlieue of Paris or other French cities. Just go to any other Italian city and you'll see what it is about. So everyone is speaking about this issue, but we need to have an approach that manages to bring into citizens' everyday life something. I mean, a presence, and art is probably the only tool to reach, that allows you to reach people. Stefano Mancuso had this great ability to actually have the environmental theme into his art, but he almost became an artist. So he wrote books that are just for dissemination, but he's telling about the stories of plants moving, or how we heard earlier about the possibility of plants that could grow anywhere, or else that citrus fruits, um, originated in the Himalayas, and then you can find them everywhere. So, this led to an ongoing cultural and scientific debate, and art has this power. In fact, the city of Prato, that is lucky enough to have a contemporary a contemporary culture center like the Pecci Museum, is the result of a political choice. First of all, it was it was renovated and enlarged. And then the Pecci Center, who is a center for contemporary art, the Pecci Center was given a role in becoming part of a wider, project, thanks to which we can, I don't know, meet people like Arte Continua. And we did a lot of things together with Arte Continua over the years, but it stems out of an underlying idea. So the idea is that if we want to deal with these important topics, and we can actually show that to everyday people. When you want to have a classic traffic calming, what you do, you remove the parking lots, you increase the space devoted to people, we can add some trees, some art, and we create a better public quality. People get mad, people want parking lots, parking places. So often these are things that have to be done, but people are not happy about them. So the more people become aware about all these issues, the more, politicians can do well their job. So you need to have a vision. You need to pay attention to all these topics that have to be ongoing and lasting for a long time. But going back to what we're doing in Prato, basically we are doing the following. We have the responsibility to give a voice to those people and those things that have no voice, plants, minorities, those who are losing their voice. We're in a very complicated social equality situation. You need to give a voice to those people that don't have it. So I am I am a counselor for the city of Prato, but I'm a teacher, I am an architect. And so it's truly a human mandate. And we need to try to have an approach that is considered as holistic. Dealing with the central theme that, when we're speaking about climate emergency and social equality, the cities are the, account for 75% of carbon production that is coming from cities. And that's where social equality manifests itself. So as human beings want to live in cities, I don't know, but since 2007, the population of living in, in cities, overcame or became more than those who are living in the countryside. So we have to start thinking that our cities need to become more inclusive and more equitable, but also environmentally more qualified. Mario was saying earlier, cities must become areas where we can actually have healthcare prevention. For instance, we were able to see during the COVID pandemic that cities themselves often generated pollutions and they played an important role. I'm not saying so much in the dissemination of in spreading the virus, but definitely contributing to worsening the health status of people that then were affected by the virus even more. So we have to start thinking, we need to change the paradigm. I deal with the urban areas of the city of Prato. And so the cities have affect people's health. And people's health, it's not just mankind's people health. There's one approach called One Health that basically says that we need to think about the health of the human beings, but also of the flora and on the fauna. So, this seems to be quite a elevated quality of thinking, but it is truly at the basis of all the activities that took place in the last few years. And that leads to the fact that a cultural institution like the Petri Center is one of the most important players in order to disseminate also these topics in their daily life, in their daily work. Because artists basically speak about these issues nowadays, and we have been speaking about that with Stefano often. So basically, artists can contribute to create an awareness about these topics. So urban forestation, or when we're speaking about the centrality of environmental issues with trees planted, or the urban jungle, like Mario was saying, especially in those densely built areas of the city, where you have no space in order to actually plant trees, or maybe using buildings for plants. But also sustainable mobility, because all these topics are connected in an urban area. When we are speaking about sustainable mobility and we are building a bike lane, after all, we are creating the good conditions for those who have to bike or ride their bike because they don't have a car. Or when we are talking about green areas that are truly healthcare prevention, equipment, areas, just think about all the exercise techniques or tools that you can find in public areas. Just think about those who need to exercise, but they don't have the money to go to the gym. And so the city must be art and beauty, but also it must include other things. In conclusion, I'd like to say that over the last few years, we have been speaking about the existing cities. We are not speaking about a newly built city. Cities were already built. There are areas that have to be perhaps demolished. They have to be regenerated or refurbished, or sometime, I don't know, brownfield projects like the one in Milan, in the Scali of Milan. But, from 2050, when Europe would like to become carbon neutral, 98% of the buildings existing today will still be there. So we need to find a way of intervening in existing buildings by improving their, energy efficiency, making them more inclusive, cooperating with cultural facilities, or perhaps, I don't know, providing new functions for this building. Like, what about if the suburbs had more proximity services? So we need to be able, within a general vision, we need to be able to understand that everything is connected. And then if we start thinking in terms of a circular economy, in other words, circular use of existing buildings, Perhaps we can even start working on the software. In other words, how can a CC work? How can it be used? Or perhaps if you put a video somewhere, sometime you put a video on a facade, it becomes a tool in order to create awe and enthusiasm. And so we need to start thinking about the fact that this new approach is complex, is complicated. We have all the tools nowadays in order to implement it, because the data we have available are manifold. CCs have a lot of data, from environmental data that show what are the most vulnerable areas, or social areas, social data where you see people, where people that have greatest social needs live, and so on and so forth. And so the social and the environmental vulnerability coincide. If you want to add more trees in a tree, you can actually plant trees in the green areas, but usually the available areas is where the population that is more well off living. And so this data allows us to have a lot of information. So in conclusion, I think we can become aware of what we are saying about art, and it's important to have a cooperation between different CCs and different art. Because we need to have a sustainable development from a social point of view, and we need to review all the the cooperation between the public and the other ones.
Nell'ambito del privato, e quindi vediamo che finalmente davvero ci siano le condizioni per ripensare in modo più armonico, no? Anche il rapporto tra pubblico e privato, ma soprattutto ripensare le città nel loro insieme. Grazie.
Noi ora si vuole, vabbè, lo dico, però no, è importante, come dire, avere persone che fanno politica, che hanno questo tipo di attenzione e anche questo tipo di preparazione culturale, perché quello, diciamo, che forse in Italia è successo in anni e che la legge Bassanini probabilmente ha anche contribuito a distruggere, che la classe dirigente sta poco, diciamo, tempo rispetto al privato cioè, a fare appunto amministrazione, e quindi poi, diciamo così, nel poco tempo che ha, costruire processi così significativi è problematico. Cioè c'è un tipo di questione che appunto vede, come dire, il fatto che il funzionario rimane a vita nel posto e il politico dopo un po' d'anni va via, quindi se il funzionario non è, come dire, compatibile o non ha le competenze o non ha la formazione per affrontare queste cose, sono problemi poi che ricadono su tutti. Quindi noi auguriamo a Valerio, no, il politico può essere anche così. Ora facciamo.
La casa è 60 anni fa si chiamava dell'ucciso. Adesso il problema è che dei politici
magari lo conosce anche lui. Facciamo finire al vice sindaco di Poggibonsi questo incontro e poi magari ne continuiamo a parlare. Però quello che volevo dire è che appunto c'è una legge in Italia devastante che fa sì che appunto chi ha una volontà politica poi non c'è tempo di praticarla. Questa legge Bassanini è stato un disastro, purtroppo appartiene al mio campo politico, e quindi ne paghiamo anche per quello le conseguenze.
Direi che
Nicola, a te.
Direi che ce ne sono tante altre di colpe che anche il mio campo politico si porta addosso, specialmente negli ultimi anni. Quindi, come dire, io vi ringrazio e scusate se vi porterò via qualche minuto per le ultime riflessioni, Mario, ma ha rovesciato, come dire, il canovaccio che di solito si utilizza, ma ha fatto bene, e quindi questo mi scuso in anticipo, diciamo che io ho solo appunti sparsi, avevo i saluti istituzionali, ma l'ho gettati e quindi avevo i saluti istituzionali, ma l'ho gettati e ho, come dire, ho qualche appunto sparso su quello che è stato detto, devo dire veramente molto interessante. Io sono un amministratore pubblico di questa città, sono il vice sindaco, assessore alle politiche culturali e dello sport. Credo di essere politico quanto tutti voi in questa sala, quindi io sono un amministratore e un politico come lo è ognuno di noi, cioè porta il peso della responsabilità politica come la porta un qualsiasi cittadino. Come vi dicevo, sono con il mio collega pro tempore a rappresentare la mia istituzione, a lavorare dentro la mia istituzione. A differenza sua e a differenza della gran parte di quelli che sono in questa stanza, io sono un contadino e quindi svolgo la mia attività nei campi. Sono nipote di mezzadri, quindi di persone che con il loro lavoro hanno aiutato ad accrescere la bellezza di questo territorio, a antropizzarla nella maniera più corretta, credo, che ha un valore imprescindibile per le nostre zone, che ancora non sono patrimonio dell'UNESCO, per esempio, a differenza delle langhe piemontesi, ma che sono decisamente molto più belle di quella zona. Pensate, per chi l'ha abitate, per chi l'ha vista, insomma, qui ancora si vede un bosco, una ginestra e un ramerino. Nelle langhe non si vede niente di questo, ma si vede dei bellissimi vigneti e qualche capannaccio, perché si vede anche cantine di poco valore. Da noi, come dire, questo è un patrimonio invece che abbiamo e dobbiamo difendere in maniera feroce, direi. Parto dal territorio aperto invece per arrivare subito al tema che Mario ha introdotto stamattina, cioè che è il tema delle periferie. Vado con appunti un po' distorti, ma che cerco di rimettere insieme. Che è uno dei grandi temi, credo, che deve stare sul piatto ora, che quando parliamo di periferie naturalmente non ci possiamo limitare a parlare di periferie che sono solo geografiche, cioè di quanto è distante un luogo da quello che potremo individuare come il centro di un agglomerato urbano. Ma chiaramente periferia di per sé porta con sé la periferia sociale, la periferia culturale, quindi la marginalità profonda delle persone e ciò che spesso si vive in questi luoghi, cioè l'altro grande tema di questi anni, che è il tema del conflitto, di cui secondo me noi abbiamo una grande paura, ma che in realtà per me è uno dei grandi temi in cui ci dobbiamo mettere le mani in maniera forte, ma mica tanto perché conflitto è di per sé una parola così brutta, perché alla fine il conflitto è scontro, ma è anche luogo di incontro. È forse uno dei luoghi dove ci si incontra in maniera anche più sincera, più vera. E quindi ecco, il luogo dello scontro, il luogo del conflitto è secondo me uno dei luoghi diciamo, da frequentare, almeno per noi amministratori. Perché è anche il luogo dove prima si verificano le modificazioni antropologiche e demografiche. Quando abbiamo incontrato per strada le opere di Anthony, la prima cosa che mi viene in mente a me è che oggi Poggibonsi è abitata da qualche migliaio di persone in più che quelle opere le possono solo vedere, ma non sanno che sono, perché sono arrivate semplicemente da un anno, da un mese, da qualche mese, che magari vengono dall'Africa, dall'Asia, dall'Est Europa, e che noi giustamente dobbiamo continuare ad ospitare, perché l'altro grande tema è la crisi demografica che le nostre città vivono, cioè l'incapacità per chi sarà anziano, quando spero il più tardi, insomma, quando sarò anziano io, chi mi pagherà come stare al mondo se ciò che ho prodotto nella mia vita non mi dà la capacità di sostentare. E quindi ecco, io credo che queste modificazioni demografiche e antropologiche debbano essere anche un orizzonte bello da praticare, perché aumentano anche qui il concetto di quello che tu dicevi, cioè il concetto della democrazia, cioè non si è democratici se ciò che facciamo non è accessibile, se ciò che facciamo non è fruibile e se ciò che facciamo, se ciò di cui facciamo non se ne conosce, non se ne conosce il valore. Sono rimasto molto colpito da alcune cose che vengono dette meglio di come non saprei dirle io. Ecco, questa cosa dell'accessibilità, per esempio, e della fruibilità, è quello che un po' Loris prima, diciamo, ha cercato di riassumere nel concetto anche di evitare di essere elite in questo senso qui, che sono elite politiche, elite culturali, elite di gruppi di interesse, perché altrimenti è come di quel concetto di democrazia e d'accesso lo si perde in maniera profonda. Io penso che ci sia un altro tema, questo lo dico da amministratore pubblico e, come insomma, se vi piace di più, da politico, ecco. Io credo che ci sia da riaprire una stagione di politiche pubbliche importanti, di politiche pubbliche e di finanziamenti pubblici in cui lo Stato torni a fare lo Stato, in termini di sanità, in termini di istruzione, in termini di politiche abitative e di lavoro e culturali. Perché tutta questa roba sta insieme, cioè si equilibra e sta insieme se c'è tutta. Se c'è tutta. E io, ecco, credo che ad oggi io non vedo una via di mezzo. Io non riesco a vedere la terza via, ecco, rispetto a questa, al mondo che ci circonda. O lo Stato ricomincia a fare lo Stato, venivano citate, ora io non sono un esperto, ma per fortuna ho avuto la fortuna di vedere le case popolari a Vienna, quello non è che l'ha fatta chissà chi è, l'ha fatta una stagione, tra l'altro anche politica precisa, insomma. Io credo che o ricominciamo a ragionare di questa roba qui tutti insieme, oppure forse ci dobbiamo arrendere, come dire, alla marginalità, alla periferia, a lasciare qualcuno indietro. Dall'altra parte c'è un'altra cosa. Ora, scusate, sono anche contento di fare questo tipo di... perché purtroppo non trovo più nemmeno tanto le sedie appropriate per farlo, ma altrimenti ci lasciamo governare da un'altra cosa che è il capitalismo. Però a quello della marginalità, dell'arte, di stare bene, della democrazia, me ne frega niente. Cioè, lì governa un altro tipo di ragionamento. Ecco. Io credo che la strada sia una e una soltanto. E più la semplifico per essere più semplice con il mio cervello, qualcuno di voi la saprebbe esprimere sicuramente meglio, è semplicemente più Stato. Più Stato. Io non vedo grosse alternative, voi poi operate anche in stati in cui forse c'è un eccesso di questa traduzione, ma non credo sia un caso che si possa anche culturalmente lavorare, forse più che in Europa, in Cina, a Cuba. Boh, a me, alla mia venuta a questo punto, mi viene da dire che forse si è sbagliato, che in Occidente si è sbagliato qualcosa. Quindi politiche, io ecco, riassumerei il concetto che il mio collega ha fatto prima e che condivido e speso appieno, di tenere tutto insieme con un tema semplice che sono le politiche pubbliche. Guardate che alla grande risposta che anch'io cerco di dare, perché poi si arriva a un punto in cui le politiche pubbliche hanno un costo. E quindi i quattrini da qualche parte vanno trovati per finanziare scuola, per fare ospedali, per finanziare case popolari più belle che possano diventare forme d'arte di cui godere e stare bene tutti. E i quattrini si sa anche dove andare a trovarli, non è che basta avere il coraggio di farlo. Ci sono multinazionali che qui guadagnano non si sa quanti miliardi, però non lasciano un euro in questo paese. Voglio dire, c'è un'evasione fiscale che è pazzesca, almeno cominciamo a metterci le mani dentro a quella roba lì e cominciamo a investire parte di ciò che cominciamo a recuperare in queste politiche. Quindi nelle politiche della formazione, nelle politiche culturali, nelle politiche sanitarie, nelle politiche abitative, che è verissimo quello che il professore prima ci diceva, cioè insieme al lavoro poi viene la casa, che è il luogo dove si forma il nucleo, dove si formano i nuclei di comunità. Io ecco, credo che il lavoro nostro sia sostanzialmente questo, che è molto difficile, forse anche utopistico. Io però non vedo nessun tipo di alternativa rispetto a questo tipo di sistema. E lo dico perché chi ha meno e chi ha meno possibilità e chi ne avrà sempre meno, se noi gli mettiamo un'opera d'arte davanti all'uscio di casa e lui non ha lavoro, scuola per i figli e possibilità di curarsi, si incazza al triplo perché gli ci abbiamo messo quell'opera d'arte, al netto che sia la più bella del mondo e che possa riqualificare al massimo quel metro di terra che c'ha davanti. Non basta. Non basta. Il ruolo di tutti noi è, giustamente ci ritorno, è tenere insieme tutto questo, altrimenti falliamo tutti. Fallisce l'artista, fallisce l'amministratore, fallisce il sistema di valori che credo ci debba e ci possa tenere insieme. Chiudo perché quando lui parlava prima di me e come dire da amministratore in questo caso si vive proprio questa difficoltà nelle scelte che poi prendi e che tu pensi siano le più giuste e che necessariamente si scontrano con la realtà di fatti. Noi stiamo lavorando diciamo in un percorso che ha avuto che non è terminato, insomma, dovrà terminare, e che vorremmo che si concludesse con una città a 30, in cui non si può andare più veloce dei 30 all'ora. Ci sono esperienze piccole. Vorremmo non arrivare secondi a Bologna, che però purtroppo ho visto che ha messo già in delibera il progetto. Secondo me è uno degli elementi che, come dicevi te, genera e può generare modifiche sane, salutari, in tutti i campi, da quello ambientale per l'abbattimento delle emissioni, ma anche in quello della generazione di, si spera, senza togliere a nessuno, perché non è che diciamo a nessuno di non prendere la macchina, gli diciamo di andare a 30 all'ora. E questo nella consapevolezza, che sarà la cosa più difficile da spiegare ai cittadini Poggibonsi, che da un punto all'altro della nostra città, andando a piedi, ci vogliono 20 minuti. È chiaro che tu devi generare però le condizioni per cui questi 20 minuti si verifichino, perché se io arrivo in un posto e ho un bimbo e un marciapiede stretto così, quei 20 minuti mi diventano un'ora o un impiccio. E allora io per togliere quell'impiccio devo togliere parcheggi, devo fare marciapiedi e devo creare spazi di socialità, perché non è un caso che noi a Poggibonsi sia scelto, come tante città, di fare marciapiedi più grandi. Non è che ci garba per forza il marciapiede, ma abbiamo fatto due operazioni. Uno, abbiamo costretto le auto a andare più piano. Due, abbiamo aumentato i luoghi, seppur considerati marginali, luoghi dove ci si può incontrare di più, dove si può svolgere socialità, dove ci può essere quel meticciato, chiamiamolo così, insomma, di cose in cui forse le relazioni nascono un po' meglio. Ecco, da queste piccole cose noi nasciamo, da queste piccole cose noi possiamo andare avanti e lo possiamo fare sicuramente con gli strumenti anche che voi ci fornite e con le sollecitazioni che voi ci fornite e anche, come dire, con ci metto 20.000 virgolette, ma per capirsi, le storture che voi ci fornite nel perché una cosa forse bisogna farla in quella maniera e effettivamente noi io almeno non ci arrivo, ma lo capisco se in un percorso di confronto ci si può arrivare collettivamente. Ecco. Grazie.
Grazie Nicola. Io voglio fare due battute perché a me la Cina e Cuba mi fanno molta paura, ci vado apposta. non è il mio orizzonte e credo che proprio su quello forse l'Occidente ha fatto meglio, ma parecchio meglio, e credo anche che quella libertà che qui abbiamo difeso a caro prezzo ci rimanga, perché questo è una minaccia, le dittature stanno invadendo l'Occidente. Cioè, per me la cosa fondamentale, come ho detto più volte, è la libertà, e mi permetto anche di dire questo, tra le storture ci metto che io davanti a una casa che non c'è nulla, preferisco averci una scultura di Gormley, altre cose, perché quello mi darà l'obbligo di pensare che io non sono prigioniero di quella casa lì. Perché noi siamo andati sull'assistenzialismo, cioè diciamo così, la cultura, per me la cultura di sinistra, la cultura progressista, o comunque neanche progressista, perché non mi garba neanche più l'idea di progresso, cioè la cultura, diciamo, che cerca di tenere insieme la comunità e di farla crescere, che crea mobilità sociale insieme alla libertà, ha bisogno della cultura, dell'intelligenza, di uscire dallo stato di natura. Noi siamo natura, ma siamo una natura particolare, e quindi è con quello che si deve fare i conti. Io mi permetto di rompere le palle a tutti su quello, perché tanto lo sanno un po' tutti. Quello è il punto, cioè noi stiamo uscendo dallo stato di natura, abbiamo gli artisti che in qualche maniera, cioè quelli che non è che tutti gli artisti, non è che tutti sono artisti, secondo me. Io mi permetto di selezionarli con la mia attività privata, dove gioco da me, pago da me, con i miei amici o con Maurizio Donezzo, se ci va male paghiamo noi, e mi permetto di chiamare dei curatori, dei professionisti a fare operazioni in piccole realtà che non si possono permettere un museo, perché tenere le luci accese, il gas e cose, il personale costa tantissimo, quindi c'è un centro, come dire, che condensa queste competenze, lo fa per tutti, e quello mi va bene. I privati che hanno più possibilità per aiutare, come dire, a fare il gioco di squadra, devono avere la possibilità di farlo senza, diciamo, ogni volta il sospetto e la generazione poi dell'atteggiamento di, come dire, di passare dietro le spalle, perché quando poi ti mettono 1000 cose. Noi abbiamo fatto, tanto siete un po' tardi, c'è il buffet che ci aspetta, per fare la donazione di questi soldi che abbiamo raccolto con gli artisti, e ci hanno prestato, ci hanno regalato le opere, tra cui anche Loris, Anthony, insomma, questi amici che avete sentito anche oggi, cioè, ci hanno dato le opere. Ci sono stati collezionisti che invece di vendergli le opere della mia galleria, gli ho venduto, insomma, venduto tra virgolette, hanno donato, diciamo, attraverso la presa, insomma, vabbè, tutto un meccanismo complicato. Cioè, per fare una donazione, per mettere gli alberi a Prato, in un posto del cavolo, perché quelli che ci stanno lì, non è per proprio ci stanno bene. C'è un'azione pratica dove Valerio abbiamo fatto l'accordo col comune, poi vai dal commercialista 50 volte con Claudia, che quella che mi ha aiutato a fare tutta questa maratona di questi 2 giorni, poveretta, torturata fino all'ultimo momento. Cioè, vai dal commercialista a quell'altro, il commercialista mio che ti fa la consulenza, magari ti piglia nulla perché è una cosa che poi va al comune, ok. L'altra mia che si fa disponibile per fare le altre cose, cioè tutta una cosa che mette insieme le persone per fare qualcosa, poi arrivi in fondo e non sai se ti fanno un culo così perché magari hai sbagliato 3 righe in una pagina, un coso. Cioè, voglio dire, un po' più facilità per chi vuole fare le cose onestamente ci vuole, perché se devo pensare che fa il criminale quando regalo le opere a Poggibonsi, ogni scultura di Poggibonsi vale $500.000, quelle di Gormley. Paladino saranno 2 milioni di euro, cioè deve essere trattato anche come fosse chissà che ho rubato, cioè non lo so. Non è che uno si può sentire in questo stato e poi farlo, cioè uno lo fa perché magari da piccino è capitato con quell'idea e non gli riesce a venire via, non è che cioè, bisogna un po' estendere il gruppo d'azione, se no qui non ce la facciamo, no? Nel senso...
Secondo me è proprio il lavoro all'interno della politica, cioè che c'ha una comunicazione con i vari livelli della politica che dovrebbe per primo denunciare questo rallentamento, le difficoltà, perché è incredibile che lui, cioè, che tutti noi vogliamo regalare qualcosa e lo Stato te lo impedisce di fatto, o perlomeno ti crea così tanti problemi che ti passa la voglia. Cioè, lui
E per questo diciamo che, cioè, chiamare questi artisti, come ti ho detto, questi artisti conosciuti a livello internazionale, cioè, ti mette in condizione poi il comune, quelle creazioni, dove fa delle cose di corsa che altrimenti non le fa. Cioè, quando ti arriva la rottura di palle grossa, il giornalista che ti dice, guarda, se no tu passi da imbecille, alla fine lo fai. Però, cavolo, vive sempre sotto la minaccia di qualcosa, non è una cosa bella. E poi ti ho detto, come dire, formare in qualche modo anche l'apparato amministrativo che gli stanno dietro al politico è fondamentale, perché quelli rimangano sempre. E il politico, poveraccio, sta lì a chiappare ceffoni per tutti. Cioè, il politico poi di questi posti qui che figlio una montagna ai rischi e poi neanche soldi. Cioè, è veramente un atto eroico fare il politico in certi posti, insomma. E qui già va bene. Più vai. Vabbè, happy birthday. Andiamo a mangiare da Matti Barni. No, voglio ringraziare pubblicamente Barni che è qui sotto e ci ha preparato il buffet, che già ha offerto anche in occasione della raccolta di fondi per la riforestazione a Prato, perché ogni volta ci dà da mangiare e da bere gratuitamente. Quindi andate al Museo Pecci non solo a vedere le fantastiche mostre, ma anche al ristorante da Matteo Barni. Happy birthday.